Okay, this is I call it the rock doo-wop chord changes, or changes. Rock doo-wop changes. And this is toward the end of the first book, my beginner rock and roll book. And I've got the capo at the second fret. You could do, you could try it without the capo, but if you're at this point in the book, we're still pretty much using the capo at least at the second fret for most things. And I introduced the C chord here, and also the D minor and the G7. We've already had the F chord in songs like Peggy Sue, but the C chord is not difficult, and it's really so common that C is one of the most common keys that you would play in. And but there's a couple of little things to watch out for with the C chord. It's only 3 fingers. You got your third finger, second finger, and first finger. And you want to just study the chart and make sure you're on the right strings and all that. And it's a 5-string chord. So what you got to try to do, if you can, and some people have real thin fingers and they can't do this, so you just try to avoid hitting the 6th string open. You don't want to hear that because it muddies the sound. Actually, it's still a chord tone. E, it's an E note, and E is in the C chord, but usually you don't want it as the bass note unless it's just a certain voicing that you want to hear. Sometimes it sounds good. If you want that low sound. But normally we want to mute that. And what I'm doing is I'm not placing my third finger on the very center of the fingertip, but I'm placing it off center so that a little bit of the skin of my fingertip touches the side of the 6th string and mutes it. And you've got to practice putting it down that way so that you don't want to have to adjust it every time you put it down, but just put it down that way. So as soon as you put it down, you're pressing the 5th string, but you're touching the 6th string to mute it. And if you've got really tiny fingers or thin fingers, a lot of women have very, petite kind of fingers. You may not be able to do this technique, but experiment with it. See, I'm pressing more on the back of the fingertip, like the string is pressing my third finger about here, and actually here's the center of the finger, and I'm back about, I'd say close to 1/4 of an inch, maybe a little less, but I've got enough finger forward to where it touches that 6th string. And learn it right when you first learn the chord. Learn to mute that 6th string if you can. If there's any way you can mute it. Some people will do it with their thumb. They'll put the thumb around the neck, but that's risky because then your fingers start going down and they could mute, like your second finger might lean on the 3rd string. You really need to get your fingers up and bent, and I wouldn't do that with the thumb unless you've got huge hands, and you can do that, but it's good to be able to do it with the 3rd finger if you can. So I'm arguing that point. Generally, you don't want the thumb over the neck. Sometimes we use it to make bass notes in chords, but that's an exception. There are times that you do hook your thumb around the neck, but there should be a reason to do that. And I wouldn't recommend it with the C chord. Okay, so you got that. And then A minor we've had. And then D minor. Now with this D minor, there's 2 different ways to finger a D minor. You can do, I'm going from the 1st string. You could do 1st finger, 3rd finger, 2nd finger. But what I've got here is 1st finger, pinky, 2nd finger. And the 3rd finger is up in the air. So I'm not using the 3rd finger on the 3rd fret. It seems logical that you would use 3rd finger on the 3rd fret, but I'm using more of a compressed fingering, which is a little more comfortable. And actually this is good for this D minor to have the third finger up in the air, and this is the reason is that now my third finger can point toward playing this G7 because it's up in the air, and if I had it on the second string it would have to jump 5 strings to go to that G. So you have the third finger up in the air with the pinky on the D minor, and then your third finger kind of, it's not right over the 6th string, but I'm pointing toward it so that it's really easy to go to that G7. Another thing is the first finger on the D minor is common to both chords going to G7. So don't lift it, don't lift it. A lot of people lift everything instinctively and then replace them. If you have a common finger and you can hold a finger from one chord to the next, always do that, almost always. You know, there might be exceptions, but rarely. And so you'd hold that first finger. Okay? G7 is kind of a stretched out chord. You've got third and second fingers and first finger on the first fret of the first string. So the third finger's on the 6th string. And the thing about the second and third fingers on G7, it's the same shape when you go back to C. So you're like moving across the street from the 6th and 5th string to the 5th and 4th strings, keeping the same shape of the second and third finger. Now, contrary to that is the first finger is moving the opposite direction across the street from the first string on the G7 to the second string on the C. So you have fingers kind of going opposite directions. You're spread out on that G7, and it's really the same fingers on C moved in, like you're contracting them in. So they're moving contrary. The first finger is moving contrary to the second and third fingers. Okay? So those are little chord changing secrets that you want to hang on to and understand. And then remember, when you go back to the C chord, you want to mute that 6th string. Okay? So there's a lot to talk about. There's on this chord. Now, a doo-wop progression, and I was talking about in Latin loopy-loo, 1 chord, the 4 chord, the 5 chord. Here you have a 1 chord, C, to a 6 chord, and that means that the root of that chord is off the 6th tone of a C scale. The C is the first tone, so that's called the 1 chord, and then you go 8, 7, 6. 8 is the same as 1. So I know it's confusing, but when you get to the 8th tone of a scale, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 8 is a C as well as 1. They're both C's, so they're interchangeable. And you could call it 8 or you could call it 1. So it's like a 1 chord, and then if you went down with the scale, that's the 7th to the 6th, and then 6, 7, 8, 2 chord. So you could think 6, 7, 1. So that's a C chord again, to a 2 chord, and that's the D minor, and then 2, 1, 7, 6, 5. G7th is called a dominant 7th because the 5th tone of a scale is the dominant tone, and we call this a dominant 7th chord. It's a G7th. So if you ever hear that term, a dominant 7th is a 7th chord that is on the 5th tone of the key. So I know that might be confusing, and I didn't really want to get into theory, but this doo-wop progression is so common. There were hundreds of songs back in the 60s written in doo-wop chord progression, and that's a 1 chord to a 6 chord to a 2 chord to a 5/7, and that even goes back to jazz, like from the 40s and 20s. I mean, it goes back to all popular American music. You'll have a very common chord progression is, we call it a 1, 6, 2, 5. Bum, 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 bum. You hear it all the time, especially in, you know, old folks music, you know, okay? So that's doo-wop, you know, like blue moon, you left me standing alone. You know, so that's one of the more common songs written in a doo-wop chord progression. So I'm just explaining why it's called doo-wop. Doo-wop was a 60s style of rock where you had anywhere from 2 to 4 singers singing in harmonies, a lot of harmony vocals in this chord progression. Okay, so I'm going to do it again. And oh, I forgot to mention the strum on this. The rhythm is 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. So it's kind of like the 12-bar blues cut in half. You only have 2 beats or 2 triplets in the measure, and it's called 6/8 time. And that's really common in doo-wop music or R&B. 6/8 is one of the most, it's kind of like a waltz, you know, it's in 3s. So you think of beat 1, 2, 1, 2, or more accurately, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3. Now the strum is going to be down, up, down, down, up, down. Okay? So it's down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down, down, up, down. And notice the first down of the triplet is heavier. So it's kind of like heavy, light, light. So the second downstroke is a light downstroke. So it's heavy, light, light, heavy, light, light. And you can hit fewer strings on the light strum. Usually I'm hitting the first 3 treble strings. It doesn't have to be perfect like that, but you can go for that, you know. So I'm going to do it again. Watch my right hand rhythm. It's 1, 2, 3, 2, ready, go. Shuffle beat, 1, 2, 3, 2, 2, 3, like that. Okay, now talking about the F chord, it's also kind of related to the C and the G chord in that your second and third fingers, keep the same shape, going C up to F, and then back to C, and then back to G. So it's C, F, C, G. I'm just talking about the second and third fingers. Hold the same shape. You're just moving across the street, you know, from one set of strings to another. Move it up across the street, back, and then down the street to the G chord, and back to the C chord. So it's good to practice that, or just place them on the different chords, just the second and third fingers. So you get a feel for that shape, and when you move it, it helps you to remember the chords for one thing, and then your hand gets in a habit, and that's really successful chord changing is a lot of habits, you know. You're grabbing more than one note at a time, and a shape. Think of them as shapes. Here's the C shape, here's the F shape, the C shape, the G7, and so forth. Okay? So that's doo-wop changes, rock doo-wop changes. And we're getting toward the end of the first book, so you know, we'll have a little celebration, you know, cap and gown. Okay? All right, so have fun with that.